And then we have Mr. Naveen Kapoor, Associate Director, Feedback Ventures. He has been working for a long time in distribution franchisee segment. And we would like to begin with Mr. Naveen Kapoor to give his presentation on public-private partnership.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have a small presentation I'll not take more than 10 minutes. There are two ways to enter power distribution, as we all know. Either we take a license or become a franchise, which is the current flavor. I'll briefly touch upon the comparison first, because that becomes important while framing any policy. Yeah. Sorry. So while distribution franchisee does not involve any equity stake and asset transfer, privatization essentially means divestment of equity. And as regards the distribution franchisee, the utility remains the primary entity which is responsible for all compliances and all. Whereas in the case of privatization, the utility itself is responsible. In a licensing environment, the licensee itself files the tariffs and all, whereas distribution franchisee has to adhere the tariffs fixed by the regulator, which is very important for us to take the issue forward. And the transaction is actually based on asset valuation when it comes to licensee, whereas it is case of input rate that is quoted, taking into account the current losses, the revenues, and also the consumer mix of that area, and also the future growth. When we see the investor's perspective, which is very important for today's forum, the transaction requirement for DF has to be on the overall health of the distribution system and the future growth, whereas licensing requires a comprehensive due diligence. With respect to licensing, the regulator role is very, very paramount, and also divestment might require state cabinet's approval, whereas in DF case, till now the regulator's role was not very, very clear, which I'll take it when we come to the FOR model that we have proposed. Potential returns in case of a licensee are capped because the regulator sees the cost plus environment, whereas in case of distribution franchisee, they have to quote a certain price based on the consumer mix, the losses, and the potential that they can put their whole resources and convert the loss-making entity into a profit-making entity. And the sooner they do, the better for them. Area selection, when it comes to licensee, has to be a minimal municipality area, though there is some legal opinion now coming on to MERC that the rules cannot override the act, so there should be no such requirement. But as of now, the commonly understood is that there has to be minimal area of municipality, though it does not apply on the existing licensee when it comes to taking over those licenses. Whereas there is a cherry-picking possibility in case of a distribution franchisee in terms of the consumer mix or the growth possibilities or the industry and the like. Stakeholder management generally in case of licensing is done by the licensee, whereas in DF, the regulatory and other aspects are seen by the licensee on behalf of the distribution franchisee. As I already said, tariff filing is done by the licensee, whereas distribution franchisee absolutely no role in tariff filing. They have to just follow the tariff fixed by the regulator. Duration for a license is about 25 years, whereas DF starting from Bhiwandi, which was 10 years, to Agra, which was 20 years, hovering around 10 to 20 years. Asset ownership remains with the licensee in case of a licensing arrangement or privatization initiative, whereas assets are given for O&M to the distribution franchisee, and the licensee remains the primary owner. Precedences we have seen in case of Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Ahmedabad, which are privatized entities, whereas in case of operational franchisee, we have Bhiwandi, Agra, Nagpur, and Aurangabad. Jalgaon is soon going to take over, and the others. The critical success factors in case of any distribution business, and that is very important from the policy framing point of view, is the level of due diligence when it comes to either privatization or DF, or accuracy of baseline. And I think baseline is the foremost critical requirement when it comes to either privatization or DF, and also the bone of contention for many cases. Availability of fund and phasing of capex becomes very important. Calculation of BST to give a levelized rate, which is case of DF only. Organization structuring and change management. During my interaction with various companies, especially NDPL, if I were to quote them, the way they manage their human resources was the critical success factor post-takeover. Customer satisfaction is very, very important when you want to turn around that area, because the customer is looking for supply security and a time-bound service. Ability to reduce technical losses also helps in improving the reliability and also reducing your losses, which can be done without any interface with the consumer. And operational efficiency by way of cutting down your commercial losses. And also support from state government and regulator is very, very crucial for any power distribution business. When it comes to policy and regulatory, I think Mr. Chatterjee will take it in a greater length, but all I can say is there's a provision in the Act, that is 6th provision to Section 14, which provides for 2 or more persons being granted license in the same area based on the requirement relating to capital adequacy, creditworthiness, and code of conduct, as may be prescribed by the central government. Central government has prescribed certain rules. Explanation 3 to the rules provides for minimum area to be municipality, municipal council, or a revenue district, which is under contest now. And the legal opinion, as seen from the MERC's website, is that the rules cannot override the Act. So there should be no such limitation with regard to the municipality areas or so. So anybody can apply for area as long as it can be identified. As far as DF is concerned, the Electricity Act provides for a definition of franchisee and also provides that it will not be required to have a license, and purchase price and tariffs continue to be regulated by the SERC. That is very, very critical, because that defines the efficiency and also the returns of a franchisee. Yeah. When it comes to risk matrix, this is, this is the culmination of our experience dealing with various franchisee organizations and also the bidders. The two things which I would like to outline here, one is the ABR and the second is supply security. These are very, very critical issues, and also the CAPEX, approval of investments, and how the availability of funds will be made in case the franchisee has to do more than the investment they envisaged at the time of entering into the contract based on their limited due diligence. In terms of models, we have 3 models which are currently running in the country. One is collection-based model, where you have some kind of fixed commission and all, but they are not partner in the input-based, like input energy that is pumped into the area, which makes them vulnerable to the same inefficiency which were continuing in the case of a licensee. Input linked is another way to cap that or bring in that responsibility, where the franchisee is given an input linked target with respect to collection. So he becomes, in a way, partner to loss reduction. And the prominent one, which is being followed everywhere nowadays, is input-based franchisee, which is ownership of the assets remain with the DISCOM. Franchisee manages the franchise area with adequate freedom. Licensee supplies electricity at a predetermined price, which is quoted in the bid. The franchisee, in a way, keeps a charge, because he quotes a certain price based on the revenue that is going to generate, so the difference acts as a charge for him to sustain. And tariff is something he has to adhere from the regulator side. In terms of experience sharing, we have one, Bhiwandi. It was like 1.6 lakh consumers with a 721 square kilometers of area. It had a 750 MVA of demand with a 2,400 million units consumption in that area. it was like losses were in excess of 55, around 60%. And Torrent had to face supplies, this distribution related, system related issues, also the customer satisfaction, the safety of the equipment and the distribution system, and also meet the customer's expectation very, very quickly, because the money not gained in the very first year or few years will be lost forever. So what they did was a very Herculean task they had at their hand, replacing about 25,300 meters. They had to invest close to about 200 plus crores of investment in first 2 years itself, out of which about 110 crores got invested in first 11 months itself, replacing the systems and all. They had to work on the customer service quality, which was making the customer distribution system safe, reliable, and also meeting the demands of the consumers. And also reduce the DT failure rate, which was very, very high in that area when they took over. And while, if you see the slide, while the distribution, while the input energy remained more or less at the same level, they could manage to bring down the losses in first 3 years. I've got the data only up to 2008-9. From the very first year that they took over, the losses came down from 40% to around 16-17% in a matter of 2 years. And the AT&C losses, which were about 63%, came down to about 19%. And that is why Bhiwandi is touted as the role model for distribution franchising, which motivated other utilities to go for it. The other model is based on reliability charge, which is Pune, where there was excess capacity available with the captive plant. So the franchisee need not have a separate license, and they were vested with the responsibility for distributing in the designated area at a predetermined price, and were also allowed to recover reliability charge from the consumers. When we come to standard distribution franchisee models, various utilities followed different models, whether it was Bhiwandi or Nagpur as in the first stage of bidding, to Nagpur in the second stage of bidding, and then Agra, Kanpur, and then the earlier ones like MP and all. Different utilities have different approaches, different trajectories for loss reduction, capex and other things. So there was a need to standardize the distribution franchising because it is evolving very, very fast now. So FOR had initiated an exercise to introduce a standard franchisee model, which aimed at standardizing certain things, certain parameters, and also bring all the stakeholders together, whether it was distribution licensee, franchisee, or regulator. In terms of the FOR's DF model, the aim is to start with the areas higher than 20% to start with. Also 2,000 million unit would be the first preference, or 500 megawatt of load, or 400 million unit to start with, and coming down to less than 20% area. The aim for less than 20% area would be to enhance service quality and also the reliability of supply. And also the model will involve purchase of electricity from the open market, enabling the franchisee through a tripartite agreement to ensure that the customers are satisfied. Contract period, as we say, is ideally 20%, but when it comes to less than 20% loss areas, since they would have to have long-term power purchase agreement, it is proposed as 20 years. In terms of the pre-qualification criteria, though there was a long debate, but the conclusion is in front of you. It should be a public limited company. It should meet the code of conduct for grant of distribution business license. Net worth of at least 50% of the annual revenue area of the franchise area, meaning thereby if you are talking of a 200 crores of turnover revenue of that area, it should have at least 100 crores of net worth to infuse confidence that they can take up that area. And the internal resource generation is 25% of the annual revenue, which is critical from the point of view of being able to spare that kind of money to carry on the business for a new initiative. What DOF model of FOR provides for is very, very stringent condition with